Hey guys, we're going to get underway with our next unit, Organic Chem, Chemistry of Life. We're going to cover things in a couple of weeks. The whole floors in the Oregon State and OHSU library are dedicated to, so we're going to kind of put a dent in it. If you have a piece of paper handy, you're going to want to take some notes. You're going to want to copy some things down, some keywords. You'll be glad that you did. So get a piece of paper handy, a pen, pencil. If you need to pause this, do so that you have all that stuff ready. Okay, so something you want to copy down, and everything that we're talking about is made of these structures. We're about to talk about everything that's in the foods that you eat and the way that your body's designed, and these things are in every structure associated with life. So one of those is the element carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen. So you'll see those elements in everything that we're about to discuss. Okay, so what distinguishes an organic compound from an inorganic compound? The key thing is the term carbon, the word carbon. Carbon we associate with life. Everything living is made of things with carbon in it, and everything that came from something alive. An exception being the carbon dioxide that's found in like the Martian atmosphere, or that we breathe out. And it's found to some degree in our atmosphere too. So that isn't considered an organic compound. Aside from that, if we find carbon in it, we consider it to be an organic compound. So things that don't have carbon in them are not organic compounds or inorganic compounds. We've sent rovers to Mars. We've sent the Viking 1 and Viking 2 about the time I was in preschool in the early 70s, and then there was a period of time we didn't, but then we started sending rovers. In the late 90s, we sent Pathfinder. In 97, and in the 2000s, we sent Opportunity and Spirit and Curiosity's up there now, cruising around, and in a couple of months, Perseverance. One thing they have in common, they're all looking for carbon, evidence of organic compounds and life. Why is carbon such a big deal? If you look at the outermost shell, there are 4 electrons in the outermost shell. Carbon's atomic number is 6. There's 2 electrons on the innermost shell, and then 4 on the outside shell. It's for that reason that it's nicknamed God's glue. But it is those electrons are perfect for adhering to and forming different shapes, different molecules. Particularly has a relationship with hydrogen. Carbon is perfect for that. Okay, so one term I'd like you to copy down too is the term monomer. Monomer, put simply, means a single piece of. And you're going to hear me say, what's a monomer of this? What's a monomer of that? And that's one thing you're going to need to know. Mono means one or single. And then, by contrast, poly means a bunch of, okay, several. So write that down too. Monomer, polymer, poly means a bunch, and monomer means one. Some of the prefixes you might hear in this unit are mono, which means one, like carbon monoxide. That's carbon bonded to 1 oxygen. Di, carbon dioxide. That's carbon bonded to 2. You'll also hear tri, like a tricycle, 3, poly, lots of, and macro, which means bigger, larger. Okay, so these are the main things that we're going to break into when we're studying organic chemistry, molecules that are in all the foods that we eat, and the structures that we and plants are made of. So one of them you're going to want to copy down is carbohydrate, which, as you can see, is a combination of the word carbon and then hydrate with hydrogen. Hydrate, to be hydrated, oxygen, water, H2O. Lipids, which is the fancy schmancy way of saying fats. Okay. Proteins. So proteins are the structure and substance that make us up, our bones, our hair, all of our solids. Nucleic acids, it's our DNA, or in the case of some viruses, RNA. Some bacteria are RNA. So DNA, RNA, those are the main components that we're going to be studying in this unit. If you have a chance, pause it if you need to and copy those down. I would give room under each one of them. Room under carbohydrate, room under lipid, room under protein, and room under nucleic acid, because we're going to be talking about the monomers of each of those, or the single pieces of each of those. We're going to start with carbohydrates, okay? So carbohydrates, when you think of carbohydrates, simple terms, think of sugars, think of grains, think of starches. In the foods examples, everything from Jolly Ranchers and honey, which are sweet juices, Coca-Cola, sweet, to more complicated and tougher to break things down like potatoes and grains like wheat and barley. Okay? Things that really fill you up are often carbohydrates. All right. Carbohydrates, one thing that you're going to want to copy down is the suffix. Remember, that's the second part of a word. Prefix is the first part of a word. The suffix saccharide. Okay? That means sugar. So monosaccharide means one single sugar, a simple sugar. Okay? And then you've got disaccharide, that's two. Table sugar is a disaccharide, fructose and sucrose bonded together. And then you've got polysaccharides, complex carbohydrates, polysaccharides, like the cellulose that tree trunks are made of, or stems are made of. Okay? So the harder something is, it's a saccharide for us to digest, the more complicated it is. Simple sugars are super easy to break down. Monomers that are just made of one saccharide, those are super easy for us to break down. But things that are very hard to break down are complex carbohydrates. Examples might be starch, like what you'd find in a potato or in a yam, carrots, wheats, the seeds, those are wheat, barley, all those are complex carbohydrates. And then cellulose is what plant cell walls are made of, tree trunks, sawdust, things like that. Okay, the next one I want you to copy down is fats or lipids. Examples of those that we'd find in the foods that we eat would be saturated fats, like the white part that you see in meat. You also find it in earwax, in boogers, and snot. Those are lipids. Also, beeswax, you find it in nature. You used it a lot. Eskimos used fats a lot to protect their skin from frostbite or from wind bite. So those are lipids. Those are extremely hard for our bodies to break down. The explorers, the first ones to ever make it to the South Pole, to Antarctic South Pole, lived off of sticks of butter, just pure fat, because it's extremely dense calories that are very hard for our body to break down. So huge energy stores. Fat is the most relished thing if you're starving or in a situation where you could freeze to death or starve. You want to eat fat. Very high energy. Unlike simple sugars, like Jolly Ranchers or honey that you just burn right through super quick. Okay, saturated versus unsaturated fats, the ones that are good for you versus the ones that aren't so good for you. So at room temperature, if you left olive oil out, it would stay olive oil. It would just stay its liquid self. Actually, in many countries in the Mediterranean, healthy countries, they dip their bread in olive oil for flavoring, and that's a unsaturated fat. It stays liquid at room temperature. This slide shows you the structure, why it can't solidify, and what it's made out of, all the hydrogens and the carbon chains that it's made out of. Saturated fat, like bacon grease, turns to solid at room temperature. The spermaceti inside of a sperm whale's head, solid at room temperature. That's a saturated fat. Okay? So lipids surround every single cell in our body. We surround every single cell in our body with what's called a lipid bilayer, little tiny phospholipids that are like a kind of like a fence that hold the cells in, a membrane that holds the cell together. So they're a very, very important part of our body, and our cells communicate. Intercellular communication is done through the lipid bilayer, that little fatty sac that holds a cell together. There's a picture down in the lower right-hand corner of the artist rendering of that lipid bilayer. Now, the next thing I want you to write down, if you haven't yet, is proteins. Proteins. Okay? A monomer of a protein is an amino acid, which is why you see these guys in weightlifting, in gyms, they have powders that are amino acid powders. They're trying to build up their muscles using amino acids, which is, in fact, kind of like a brick for a brick wall. It is a piece of your proteins. So, amino acids, piece of a protein. Amino acids are basically, proteins are basically all the solid, actual rigid parts of your body made of protein. Everything you can kind of smack. So from bones to, flesh, the muscle and hair, those are all made of proteins. You have to have several different types of amino acids that are key in your nutrition. And most of them you can eat good solid foods and a good balanced diet. Basically, they add structure to your body. So if you look at a pearl necklace, this is what a protein, when it's being formed inside of your body on the ribosomes in your cells, it's kind of like an amino acid and then a peptide bond, an amino acid and a peptide bond, amino acid and a peptide bond. That's what's called a polypeptide chain, and this is what your proteins are made out of. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, and what that means particularly. But your cells are constantly making proteins. That's their job. They send instructions out of the nucleus out to the outer part of your cell to these little ribosome workshops, and their job is to make proteins. You have to give your body lots of amino acids so that it can make proteins. Amino acids are a monomer of a protein. Also under that protein heading are enzymes, okay? And we're going to show you a lab that demonstrates the role that these enzymes play, but the lab that we're going to do, we're going to take an enzyme that can take hydrogen peroxide and break it apart into the bubbles that you recognize. It takes hydrogen peroxide and completely breaks it apart, and it can be reused over and over and over again. Enzymes in your body don't get used up. Digestive enzymes and the catalase enzyme I'm talking about that breaks apart hydrogen peroxide doesn't get used up, but can be reused over and over again. We'll actually show you a demonstration using chicken liver where we use enzymes over and over again to break apart hydrogen peroxide, and then we do something to damage that chicken liver, high temperature, or bathe it in alcohol, and what that process is called is denaturing an enzyme. You change the shape. If you look at this slide, you see these puzzle pieces that all fit together nicely. The green piece being an enzyme. Well, if I were to put that green piece under heavy temperature or expose it to the kind of toxicity you'd find in drugs, you've changed the shape, and it can no longer create the reaction that you need it to. So that's a good reason not to take up vaping. You don't want to change the shape of the enzymes in your body so they no longer work. You don't want to denature them. We'll learn more about that as it goes. But yes, denaturing is the process of changing the shape of an enzyme. Nucleic acids being the last one that we're going to talk about. Deoxyribonucleic acid, the DNA that makes up the chromosomes in your cells. You get 23 chromosomes from your mom, 23 3 for your dad, like a slinky, and those are made of DNA.